How do you feel about the freight market in 2026?
Man, it's been a heck of a year. And then you realize we're only a couple weeks into 2026.
2026, we are here.
Exactly.
You're listening to The Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network with your hosts, Josh Haynes and Paul Gibson.
All right, you're listening to The Freight Break. How's it going today, Josh?
It's going good. Happy Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday. Happy Wednesday. It's cold. It's January.
The winter storm this past weekend was wild, especially like everything going to the south. You know,
Yeah.
it was crazy.
I had friends down in Florida that were getting snow. In Florida.
There was ice everywhere, and there were a lot of people who were not happy about it.
Speaking of travel and sponsors and all the things that are going to come up, if you want to sponsor us, link in the description below. You could replace Paul's face.
Yeah, but you can put your logo up right here. We can do an ad read, or we can actually come to you and film a commercial, an ad for you.
Ideally, not when it's like 2 degrees outside. That would be great. But, you know, beggars can't be choosers, and we're here begging. Also, we have multiple conferences coming up here in the BCS network. Of course, you can always jump on bcsfreightnetwork.com. We've got the Cross Border coming up February 17th through the 18th. That is coming up rapidly fast. If you have not signed up for it, sign up for it. It's going to be great. As well as we've got the other one coming up in Kansas City. The BCS is going to be here in our hometown. And you can sign up today. Registration is open.
Yep, you can actually go. We'll both be in Kansas City. You can party with us. We'll show you around town. We'll both definitely be in Dallas, and Josh will even be at the Cross Border Connector here at the end of the month. I'll be at Manifest. Come say hi. But I think it's time for our new segment,
2026 Market Non-Update.
So the website Trucking Dive did a article on a bunch of people who are great minds and great voices in the industry, people well respected, great analysts behind them, a lot of power, a lot of data, and asked them how they felt the 2026 freight market was going to go. And so I was reading the article, and as I was reading it, if you just look at the quotes without actually like pulling out the context, it kind of created a pretty interesting picture. DatIQ principal analyst Dean Croak said, anything could happen this year. My money's on it being a crazy year. That tracks. So FTR Transportation Intelligence VP of Trucking Avery Weiss said, we really expect the overall truck freight market that 2026 will essentially be a repeat of the demand that occurred in 2025.
Love that.
Last year was wild. Probably going to be wild. And that was after FTR called the rates to rise in the range of inflation or possibly weaker than inflation. So they're going to go up or they're not. And then Uber Freight said, if the FMCSA regulation on non-domiciled CDL carriers passes, the market could experience significant tightening, leading to double-digit growth in spot rates. Our best explanation here is that the market is tightened because of supply and not because of demand. So, yeah, there's reasons. OOIDA's executive director, Andrew King, chimed in and said, I would imagine that there will be small incremental increases from last year overall, but will it be enough to kick us actually into an upcycle? I don't know. You know, hey, what are your thoughts? Let's end with a question. None of this is a slight on anybody. These are some of the most brilliant minds out there with some of the biggest data sets and, you know, like money behind them, all of it. Great people. So it's not a slight on anyone. I just want to reemphasize that. But at the same time, it looks unpredictable. It looks wild, and you know, it goes into what I say every time. This environment is not made for most people to survive, let alone thrive. So it's important to find people who actually love the industry and want to make it better, who almost want the supply chain to work more smoothly for the love of the game. You know, we're all in it for, you know, we obviously get paid, but it's important to have that community of like-minded people, because if you don't have relationships, you're not going to make it in this market. You're just not. It is all about relationships. But that's my take. Is I don't know either. Who am I, Josh? How do you? Let's go to you. I don't think we even bumped you last time. How do you feel about the freight market in 2026?
Man, I tell you what, I wasn't really sure, and then I came across a video that is pretty spot on how I feel, where it's like the truck's still going. It's seen some serious, but it's still going, and you're like, man, it's been a heck of a year, and then you realize we're only a couple weeks into 2026.
I think that's a great example. You know, it's 2026, the freight industry working in it. You know, looking at the market, looking at everything, where everything's going. What are we? We are here.
Exactly.
But you know who else is here? Our guest today, Matt Silver. How's it going, Matt?
I'm good. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah. So the cross-border connector is one of like the first of its kind. And the thing is, like, I don't know. I've spent a lot of time on the carrier side. I don't know anything about cross-border freight. Obviously, I know it goes across the border. I know there's got to be more to it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be something that people specify. But like, I guess just to start off, what is the number one thing that you find out that people don't know about cross-border freight when you start talking to them about it?
The number one thing that's the most shocking is that there's no cargo insurance in Mexico. If I were to give you like at the highest level of why it's like why Mexico is different, and even Mexico versus Canada drivers go across the border just like they're driving across a U.S. state border, and so there's obviously a little bit more to it. There's customs, but it's like a 30-minute stop. It's not a few days, and it's one driver typically that'll pick something up in Toronto, and they could deliver in Chicago the next day. They'll cross in the Windsor-Detroit bridge and go directly to Chicago from there. When you're moving something out of Mexico, a carrier actually sends their trailer into Mexico, but their drivers don't go to Mexico. The trucks don't go to Mexico unless they're going right across the border. So think of it like a relay. Freight gets loaded in a trailer in Guadalajara on an American trailer owned by an American company, but being pulled by a Mexican carrier. And it gets brought up to Nuevo Laredo where it gets dropped off. And then either a transfer carrier will take that trailer across the border, or a B1 driver will take it from Nuevo Laredo. They'll cross the freight. They have to be the ones that cross the freight, and then they'll go deliver the load. And once they deliver that load, if they're a B1 driver, they have to take freight back to the border, back into Mexico. Otherwise, what you've probably seen a lot on the internet, if you're spending any time on FreightX, you're running into cabotage issues if that driver does not go back to the border.
So there is one thing that I noticed, and not knowing much about cross-border freight, and also this is like a way deep dive, like looking into the future kind of thing, is, you know, with like a lot of the non-domicile CDLs and stuff like that, you know, a lot of the camp in 2025 still going on. One of the things is to solidify a lot of the things, because a lot of that's some stuff that was already like laws that's just being enforced, but there is some additional things to it. And to lock all of that in, I think it's like the Save America's Roads Act. But in that, one of the things that caught my attention as someone who knows little is that it removes reciprocity for Canadian and Mexican CDLs in America. So hearing you explain like that relay situation, in knowing that it's a bill in Congress, it probably won't pass because they've got a million other things they're trying to do. But I know that's got some weight behind it, and what it's tied to makes it a possibility. What would that, if that did enact and there was no reciprocity with CDLs at all, because of that relay situation you just explained, would that make much of a difference with Mexican freight?
It would make a way bigger difference with Canadian freight. Most of the freight moving in and out of Canada, it would be exceptionally disruptive to both. Almost all the Canadian freight is being hauled by Canadian drivers or drivers hauling, Canadian trucking companies, rather. It's not always Canadian drivers, obviously. A lot of them come in from overseas, and that's where sometimes people have issues, especially in Canada, because there's like a whole driver Inc. issue that exists in Canada with drivers that are, not paying their taxes and all that stuff that come in from overseas, and carriers tell them to do this stuff that's shady. So you've got that issue, and then for Mexico, um, it is a Mexican driver that's hauling a lot of the time from Nuevo Laredo to the U.S. They live in Nuevo Laredo. They cross the border every day with freight, or as often as they're moving freight across the border. They're trained. They've passed the right driving requirements to be able to haul that freight. What I think people, and that's most of the freight. So like, what would happen is if you didn't allow B1 drivers and if you did not allow Canadian drivers, Canada freight would stop moving. You'd have to start sending American drivers to Canada with that freight. And I think Canada would go, no, 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 no. If you're not going to let our drivers do it, we're not going to let your drivers. So that would be disruptive. And then for Mexico, you would end up having to transload everything. You'd have to transload a lot, or well, not everything, but a lot more freight. You've got obviously the big national guys like Werner and Schneider and JB Hunt. They all use, I think, entirely American drivers, and there's definitely some other carriers that have drivers with CDLs, but you would lose that middle market chunk of those carriers that have anywhere between 10 and 250 trucks that are almost predominantly B1 drivers. And those are great carriers. Those drivers run. They run automotive freight. They run consistent freight. They follow the laws. They are more scared of breaking a law than anybody else is because of the potential for not being able to continue to haul cross-border freight, because then they have to go back and haul Mexico domestic freight. And so there's a lot of incentive for these drivers to learn English and make sure that they can pass the English language proficiency mandate that rolled out, and to follow the laws in general. So you rarely come across these cross-border carriers breaking the law because they've got the CTPAT program where it's Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. So it's a government overseen agency with customs, and they have to follow those rules. So there's so many more reasons why I would trust a B1 driver than I'd trust your average driver throughout the United States with hauling high value freight because of what comes from moving out of Mexico. So it's I would separate B1 drivers, Canadian drivers, from the drivers that came in from overseas that are here illegally, that overstayed their welcome, that are probably sending money back to overseas, like the guys that did that U-turn in Florida. I think that's a very different thing. And so that's where my thoughts are, I guess, on that one.
All right. So after learning a whole lot after 2 questions, just like that, that I had no idea about, one thing that I would ask is with the cross-border connector coming up in Laredo, that seems like a very niche market, and so the same thing with like anything in freight, the more niche is, like the less room and capacity there is, especially with the market the way it is in most of those situations. What does that look like for somebody getting involved, like a regular US carrier who's like, hey, I might want to get into that game? I know there's those like in between, like the B1 carriers you're talking about and stuff like that. What kind of room is there to maneuver in that area?
So if a lot of carriers that are running cross-border freight are definitely more regionalized. There are the guys that cover everything, and then there's the national guys that do really cover everything, like the guys that I mentioned earlier. But the most of the guys are moving where a lot of automotive freight moves. So if you think about the automotive footprint in the United States, it's very heavily the Midwest, the Southeast, and Kansas City for is it Ford? I think that's got a big plant there. And so you've got the Michigan group, you've got Ohio, you've got Volkswagen in Chattanooga, Hyundai and Kia in Alabama, and BMW in South Carolina. And so it forms this like, the Midwest to Southeast, down over to Kansas City, down to Dallas and Houston, and through Laredo. And that is like the corridor that most freight is moving between the US and Mexico. And that is what I would call, like, used to call the NAFTA corridor. Now it's the USMCA, but that's where most carriers run because that's where most automotive freight is moving. Automotive freight is really consistent. It's repetitive. It's dedicated. Carriers want consistency. They don't just want like ad hoc spot freight all day long. There are carriers that play the spot market that will do that off of like your legacy domestic US load boards, but on the cross border side, and like we see this on both like spot and contracted and Cargado, it's like 60-40 split between contracted and spot in terms of what's getting posted from brokers and what carriers are bidding on. And so Carriers want that consistent freight. They want the predictability because they want to send those drivers back every day. And when it comes to getting their drivers back home, that's where they'll take more spot freight, and where southbound freight gets more competitive because there's way more freight going from Mexico to the US than US to Mexico. So if you have a shipper that offers you an entire, like they send you their whole RFP, let's say it's one of the big appliance manufacturers that makes appliances, whether it's in like Monterey or Querétaro, and those are going into the US, and they think about it, they go to like every single big box retailer, whether it's like a Best Buy or a Lowe's or a Home Depot, anywhere that they sell TVs, anywhere that they sell appliances. So that freight is coming out of 2 different locations in Mexico, going up through Laredo, all over the United States and in Canada, because that's how they feed it. Sometimes they'll go to distribution centers and distribute from there, but a lot of the time it goes to their customers if it's final products coming out of Mexico. And so when you're looking at that side of the market and the freight that's coming out of there, it's going all over the country. And so naturally, as a shipper, you're going to give that to either some brokers to take that freight, or you're going to give that to one of the national carriers. But again, you're putting your eggs in in one basket with a large carrier, and you're competing with a lot of other shippers for that capacity. So with a broker, they can spread that volume out. And so if you think about the freight going to the PNW, going to Seattle, going to Portland, that's not going to be hauled by the same carriers that are going to take the freight to Atlanta or to Tennessee. And so you've got your kind of niche carriers within that segment that will haul to those different markets, haul different equipment, different commodities. They'll move open deck. So you go to the cross-border connector, that's where you end up meeting all these carriers, because they are all based in Laredo. For the ones that do the freight that moves through Laredo, they're all there. They all go to these events. They are in like these 5 industrial parks that you can just drive around in all day. You can go meet them. They're all there. They're all in Cargado also, obviously, but like they're, all the owners go to these things. They all go to the happy hours. That we're throwing a happy hour. So like, yeah, they all are.
I've been out in Laredo one time, down there visiting a carrier, and that was a time.
Do you remember who you visited?
It was actually MVT.
Mesilla Valley. Oh, awesome.
Yep. Yeah, we were down there because
Charles works with them.
We were down there we filmed their golf tournament.
Yeah, Paul hung off the back of a golf cart. It was pretty awesome.
Did you get our swag at the golf tournament? I think we did like the towels or something.
No, I think they kicked us off pretty soon after they saw Paul on the back of the golf cart. Just kidding.
Yeah, it was a time. We were, we didn't. We only spent about a half a day at the actual golf tournament. We had to go into their terminal after that. We needless to say, we played, but we did not play golf.
So Mesilla Valley owns a company now that they bought called Stagecoach. Stagecoach was like a very long time trucking company in El Paso. Jenny McLaughlin is the person at Stagecoach who's like, I think her grandfather originally started it, and she was there when I started the Mexico business at Coyote. And my boss at the time, this guy Bob Chappius, that's at Uber Freight now, he kept telling me, just call Jenny and ask her. She knows everything about Mexico. And so every other day I was getting these Mexico opportunities, I was calling Jenny. And I'm like, I need your help. We have these Mexico opportunities. I don't know what I'm doing. Like I found, like, I've got, 2 other carriers that I've called. And she's like, we could do that stuff. We could do that stuff. She's like quoting a bunch of it. And I'm like, but I need somebody in Mexico to do some other loads that are just going from Monterey to Laredo. She's like, all right, you want to talk to Carlos at Larmont, and then introduce me to Larmont, and then introduce me to these other guys. And so, I've been to that golf tournament in El Paso and met Royal Jones once, and George Chestine's a great guy who runs day to day for MVT, but Stagecoach has always been like one of the companies that helped me get started with Mexico.
Looking ahead, like 5 to 10 years in cross-border freight, what do you think will be driving that? Will it be tech? Will it be policy? Will it be relationships? What do you think will be, driving the industry in cross-border freight that you're seeing on the horizon that maybe is not here yet or is here, but it's kind of not being talked about as much?
Autonomous trucking is going to be a big part of it. So I don't think it'll be humans driving it. To like answer your question with here's the thing. I've gone deep on a lot around AI recently. And I think it's clear that it is transformational, and arguably, I believe it's going to end up being the most transformational, most transformational technology that we've ever seen or experienced. More than the iPhone, more than social media, like the way that it works, the way that what it does. I have a Tesla. It's got full self driving. I don't drive my car anymore. I don't even have to look. I can actually, I don't do this a lot, but like I could be messaging with, I just created my own AI agent using Claude code and named him Walter. And I can text with Walter on Signal to have him build things for me while I'm in the car if I think of something. And by the time I get home, like it's been pushed to production and I can go see it.
I love to hear somebody like doing more than like chat GPTing some stuff.
Dan from Ally Logistics is like going crazy deep on this stuff too. He's been buying quite a bunch of stuff for his team, and like I think people are actually using it, and it's very cool. And I've like so there's like a whole spectrum of how much people believe in this, because then I've heard of some freight brokerages that only let their team use Gemini, for example, and they won't let them experiment with Claude, which is insane. And so if I think about like my car and how it drives itself and like how aspirational Elon Musk is with everything he's building, I don't see any reason why Tesla trucks are not going to be self-driving themselves or self-driving also, and why that won't eventually scale. And same thing with Kodiak, same thing with a lot of these other companies, Wabi. You know, Leo Ron doesn't leave the role of CEO of Uber Freight to go take a COO role unless he thinks it's going to change the entire world, or at least the entire North American freight industry. And so, do I think Mexico gets there at the same speed as the US does? No. I think the infrastructure in Mexico is much further behind. I don't know that there are a whole lot of charging stations for electric vehicles, which are going to be more dependent for self-driving trucks. But like, I do think we're starting to go in that direction. And I think with how much I've seen things accelerate, even in the last 2 months with stuff like with Claude, for example, I just, and even with my car, like I've only had this car for, I want to say like 6 or 9 months. And it would yell at me before if I looked down for even 30 seconds. It just keeps getting updated and it keeps getting better. And it's safer than me driving the car. You ask anybody, if you're going to be at the cross border connector, ask anybody that's been there with me before when I'm driving. It is not the best idea for me to be driving. So like when that car is driving itself, it has so much more training than I do for driving a car. And so eventually I think cars and trucks are going to be driving themselves. And I think this industry is going to continue to evolve. And then I think freight brokerages are going to dramatically evolve, because they will continue to be around and continue to exist as the middle player. And with the risk, I don't think AIs are just going to automate everything. I do think it will create way more leverage for these brokerages, though. The guys that lean into this stuff, the companies that fully lean in, that fully adopt it and believe in it and start thinking about how to get every single one of their employees to do 10 times more than what they're doing right now. It's, the ones that are doing that are going to win. They will continue to survive. We will see more consolidation. We just saw this with Echo and ITS. We're now hearing about companies potentially going under, filing for bankruptcy. We saw one is restructuring, thankfully, but like there is a dramatic evolution that's going to happen. I don't know which companies are necessarily going to be the ones that are going to drive a lot of that. I do know that it's going to be Claude and ChatGPT or OpenAI or Anthropic and OpenAI, I guess, that are the underpinning technology that does that. But this industry is going to evolve. It's going to change. It's going to get better and more interesting, because people will spend way less time putting random data into systems nonstop, and they'll be able to spend their time actually doing interesting things, solving problems. The relationship stuff obviously is the most important, but like if I were betting on freight brokerages right now, I'd be betting on the ones that are investing heavily in technology. That is not a pitch to Cargado, by the way. It's just like technology in general for how they operate.
Well, speaking of pitching Cargado, just kidding, kind of. So two things with that real quick. Two last things. One, going a little bit back to, prior to, because that is in the future. And even if when it does go to the future, your point, like a lot of those freight brokerages will get leveraged, possibly have more leverage. But the thing is the way you were explaining the way you got into cross-border freight, it seems like it is well connected, and it seems like it's pretty open. It doesn't seem like it's tight knit thing. So it seems interesting that you can meet one person, and as long as you build a good relationship, you're going to meet everybody, and you're going to know how the whole thing works, and kind of get to know what you need. So, like, can you kind of explain to me a little bit more about that ecosystem as far as networking goes, and like why it would make sense to go to the Cross Border Summit? Like, would you have access to those kinds of connections? Would someone walking in the door have that kind of experience? And then also inside of that ecosystem, what role does Cargado play?
So, okay, so that example that I gave at the very beginning about how a trailer moves across the border, that's called a partnership between it's Mexico partner carriers is what like a U.S. carrier will refer to their partner carriers in Mexico as. So like they, take most U.S. carriers that send their trailers into Mexico that are of a substantial size, they'll work with multiple partner carriers. So if you were to go to a random trucking company in Mexico's website, if they're big enough and they've built out their website enough, you'll see logos on their website of U.S. carriers. It'll say like Werner, Schneider, JB Hunt, Danny Herman Trucking, like that they're partnered with all the big guys, or that they've partnered with a bunch of smaller guys. And so they publish that on their websites. And so first of all, like when I talked about Jenny introducing me to Carlos, like that is a partnership that Stagecoach had with Larmont. Stagecoach also had partnerships with other carriers. So like Larmont, Lar is Laredo, Mont is Monterey. Larmont moved between Laredo and Monterey. If Stagecoach needed somebody to pick up loads for them in Guadalajara, it was with a different carrier. Because Stagecoach was based in El Paso, if they needed somebody to move their freight from Chihuahua up to El Paso, it was probably with somebody called Trent Servicios, this guy Julio, who I'm friends with, who Jenny also introduced me to actually. And so you like you have to obviously be outgoing and willing to have these conversations and continue to build that network. But like you start to see that there's these partnerships that are established, and we've started to map this out in our system. But like one carrier in the US might be partnered with 4, 5, 10 different carriers in Mexico. One of those guys in Mexico is also very well partnered with multiple guys in the US. And so you go to Laredo, they're all there. You see their logos on the trailers, you see the trucks, you go meet them. The best thing about these carriers in Laredo, though, and at most border cities, they actually want to help you win freight. They do not have a sales team. They don't have a way to go get a bunch of freight from different shippers. They've got a handful of customers that they've met at some point, but most of them don't have a sales team. They either send out their trucks to brokers. Now they post them in Cargado also. They go into Cargado to find freight, but like they don't have more than a handful of brokers that they've worked with ever until they started to get access to Cargado. And so go meet them in person. We help connect, obviously, through the stuff that we do in the product, but like go do that stuff in person, meet them, build trust, build relationships. They will help you with the hardest stuff because they want you to be successful, because they know you'll get more freight from more shippers and feed them that freight. And they'll be the ones that helped you out. And so they'll come back every time. And so those carriers are the best in Laredo and in a lot of the other border cities. You just have to go down there and meet those guys and drink some tequila with them or carajillo.
I love that. And we're all about that. I mean, that's kind of the heart of the BCS is like, hey, it's a wild environment. It's not necessarily built for people to thrive in, and you got to find good people to work with if you want to survive not only this market but just the way everything's regulated. So we love that. And yeah, so excited to have you on for the Cross Border Connect. And if people want to find you, where can they find you at?
I'm on LinkedIn, obviously. I'm on X. It's just Matt Silver, and then Cargado.com. And I have a newsletter, congratsonalltheprogress.com, which blends freight tech, and AI, and kind of whatever else I want to talk about.
All right. Well, I love that, man. Thanks for coming on the show. And Josh, I think it's about time.
It is. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you check out the Cross Border February 17th through the 18th, bcsfreightnetwork.com if you haven't checked it out. Links in the description below. We'll see you guys next time.
You've been listening to the Freight Break on the BCS Freight Network. And now, you're not.